In this lesson, you'll be kicking off our section on Node.js testing by doing two very important things. First up, you'll be creating and running your very first test. So you'll see exactly what tools we'll be using to get that done. Then the second thing you're going to do is take a few minutes to explore why testing code is so essential. Whether it's a Node.js application or an application written in another programming language, you should be writing test cases to automatically verify that your project is always working as expected. Now, that order might seem a bit counterintuitive. You might want to know why you should test your code before you actually write your first test, but I promise it's going to be a lot easier to understand why you should test code after having already written a test case. So that's the order we're going to take. We'll write a test case, then we'll talk about why tests are so important, and by the end, you'll be ready to continue on and start to write tests for the Task Manager app. Alright, let's go ahead and dive right in by setting up the one tool we're going to need to write our test cases. Now, there are literally dozens of different libraries that allow you to create and run tests for your Node.js application. Over in the browser, we're going to explore two of the major players, one of which we'll be using in this section. So let's crack open two tabs. The first tab is going to open up the Jest testing framework, which we can find at jestjs.io. Now, this is the testing framework we're actually going to use in this section. The other testing framework, which I want to take a quick moment to address, is Mocha. You can find that over at mochajs.org. Out of all of the options available to you as someone who wants to write test cases for their Node.js project, I'd say that Mocha and Jest are definitely the most popular and the most widely used. Now, as you head out into the real world and start to work on Node projects, whether they're open source or for a company, you'll see some companies that happily use Mocha, other companies that happily use Jest, and other companies still that use other testing frameworks entirely. All of these can achieve all of the same results, so in the end of the day, it's really just a matter of picking one that fits your personal style and preference, and then starting the process of writing your tests. And the good news is that it's pretty easy to switch between them should you need to, but once again, they can all do the same stuff. So what we're going to do is go with Jest. Jest is a bit more modern and comes with a couple of nice-to-have features that just make it a little easier to write and manage our test cases. So what I'd like to take the next few minutes to do is set up Jest in our Task Manager project and create and run our very first Jest test. Over in Visual Studio Code, the very first thing we need to do is install a brand new NPM module, so something new as a development dependency. So all of the modules for testing our application are only going to run on our local development machine. They're not things we're going to need on our production server, so we can install them as dev dependencies. Right here from the Task Manager directory, we're going to install Jest using the following command. That is npm I jest at 23.6.0, then we'll specify that save dev flag to save Jest as a development dependency. I'm going to take a quick moment to run that, and once it is done, all we need to do is set up a single new script. That script is going to start up Jest, and Jest is a zero configuration testing framework. That means that by default, it has everything in place for us to get started, but of course there are options and arguments we can use to customize it as we want to change how Jest works, and we'll explore some of those a bit later. But for now, Jest is installed, and what we're going to do is create a new script in our scripts object. This script is going to be a key value pair like our other ones. The name of the script will be test. And what are we going to do? We're going to use Jest. That is Jest, and we're done. There is no need to provide any additional details. So right here, when we install Jest, we get access to it as a command we can execute. We could install Jest globally to run it from the terminal. but since we've installed it in our project like we've did with things like NodeMon, we can simply access it from our scripts up above. Now that we have this in place, what I want to do is actually run the test command just to see what we get. So from the terminal, I'll be using clear to clear the terminal output, then I'll go ahead and run npm test. I'm going to fire off the command, it is going to start up Jest, and what do we get? Right here, we can see we have an error. The error message, no tests found. It's telling us that it's looked in our project, the task manager directory, and it's checked 10 files for test cases, but it hasn't been able to find any test files. So what we're going to do is create our very first file to house our very first test. The first thing we want to do is create a new folder for all of our test cases. So that's going to be a new directory in the root of our project, so a new folder in the task manager directory, which I will call tests. Now that name is not particularly important, you could call it whatever you like, but the name tests is pretty clear. Next up, we'll be creating a file to contain some test cases. As we write more tests, we will break them up across multiple files, but for the moment, we can just start with a single one. Now, right here, let's say we're trying to write some tests to make sure some math functions we've created are working as expected. I might call the file something like math.test.js. In here, we'll write our test cases, and this file will be picked up by Jest. The reason Jest is going to treat this file as a file that contains test cases has to do with the name of the file itself. So it ends in .js, meaning it is a file that contains JavaScript code, and that's true. All of the code we write in here is going to be plain old JavaScript. The .test extension, that makes sure that Jest knows this file contains test cases that we want to run. So down below, it's saying that it checked 10 files, but wasn't able to find any test cases because none of the files in our project had that .test.js extension. Now that we do have a file that has this extension, let's go ahead and run npm test one more time. Now it's still not going to work, but it's going to fail for a different reason. Right here, we'll use clear to clear the terminal and npm test to rerun Jest one more time. Right here, we can see that it has indeed failed, and if we scroll up, we will see why. So right here, it did detect our file, math.test.js, in the tests directory. Right here, we're getting the following message. Test suite failed to run, and it says that our test suite must contain at least one test. So right now, Jest is saying that our test cases have failed because we have a file, but it doesn't have any tests. So let's go ahead and fix that by actually creating our very first test case. To create your first test case, all you have to do is call the test function. Now, you'll notice that the test function is not being loaded in with anything like a require. Jest actually provides the test function as a global in your test suite files. Now, Jest provides other globals as well, and we'll explore those as we continue through the section. For now, all you need to know is that in your test suite, you call test to set up a new test. Now, right here, when we call it, we provide two arguments. The first is a string, and the second is a function. The string is the name for your test case, so I could say something like user should not be able to sign up with a password shorter than X characters. For the moment, though, we'll go ahead and say something like hello world. Perfect. So now we have our test case name in place, and here we have the function. The function contains the code you want to run to actually verify that the given feature is working as expected. Now, for the moment, we're going to leave that function completely empty and simply save the file. With this change in place, down below from the terminal, once again, I'll be clearing the terminal output and using npm test to rerun that test suite. And right here, we can see it is looking through math.test.js, and right here, our test suite is now passing. I have a little check mark next to my test case hello world with some statistics down below. So right here, we have a passing test suite, even though this function does absolutely nothing. Now, this test case isn't doing anything, but it is considered a passing test case, so why is that? When we register a test, we call the test function, providing a name and the function. When Jest runs our tests, it simply runs that function. If the function throws an error, then the test case is considered a failure. If the function does not throw an error, then the test case is considered a success. So down below, let's go ahead and call test a second time to set up a second test case. For the name, I'll pick something like this should fail. Then I'll go ahead and provide that second argument, the function to run, and to actually make this test case fail, all we're going to do is throw a new error with the following message, failure. Perfect. Right here, we're going to save the test suite. Down below, I'll use clear to clear the terminal output and npm test to run that test suite again. Right here, I would expect Jest to find my file, run both tests, and down below, we can see that is exactly what's happening. So right here, we have our general summary, test suites. We have one total test suite and it has indeed failed. And down below, individual test cases. I have two total tests, one passed and one failed. Now, if I scroll up, I can get some more information about the one that did fail. Right here, I can see which ones succeeded and which ones failed. I have the error message that was provided, and I can also see exactly where that occurred in the test case. So there we go. When we're creating tests, all we're doing is creating functions. If everything worked as expected, we don't throw an error. If something went wrong, we do throw an error. Now, we could use this approach to test a simple function that adds up to numbers. We can also use this approach to try to log in to our Express API with invalid credentials, making sure that we don't get an auth token back. So this simple principle is going to be able to be expanded into more complex real-world scenarios. So down below, let's take a quick moment to talk about why we want to write test cases for our projects. Right here, I have a few key points, though there are others. So why test? First up, testing saves time. Now, yes, you have to write more code, but that's okay. We write the code once to test a specific feature, and we can run it as many times as we'd like. So if I create a new feature, I create a test case for it. Then over the next 4 or 5 years of development, I can keep just running that test case automatically by running the test command. There's no need to recreate it or do any manual work whatsoever. Now, this is going to be even greater as your application grows in size. It'll no longer be feasible to manually test everything, and you'll rely on an automatic test suite, which brings us to the second point. When we test our code, we create more reliable software. So whether you're just creating a project for yourself or working with a company or trying to launch a startup, writing test cases is going to make it much easier to create reliable code. You'll be able to spot and fix bugs before they actually get shipped to production and mess up users. So we will have a test suite that makes sure everything is working, and if something in our application was to break, one of our test cases would fail, alerting us that something's wrong. If we run the test suite and all of our test cases are passing, then we know everything is working as expected, and we can have a little more peace of mind that our software is functional. Now, when we have a test suite in place, it also gives flexibility to developers. I can refactor code trying to do things in a different or faster way, and as long as my test cases are passing, I know I haven't broken anything. I've just changed how something is done. It also makes it much easier when collaborating with others. If someone's coming into your project to add a feature or fix something, they might not be up to speed on all of the different features of the software and how they fit together. When you have an automatic test suite, that new developer can simply run the test cases and ensure that they haven't broken anything when they changed one area of the project. You can also do a bit of profiling, so you can see if the speed your test cases run goes up or down as you make changes, so you can slowly make your application faster and faster over time. And lastly, a point I already mentioned is peace of mind. You'll know that you have an automatic test suite you can run to verify your entire project in a matter of seconds. If I wanted to make sure the task manager was completely functional, I would have to go over to Postman, I'd have to fire off a bunch of different requests, changing things to make sure I got the correct errors when bad data was provided. It would be a slow process, and there would be a lot of room for human error. It's possible that I would see the results and not realize they're incorrect. When we have a code-based test case, we can rerun our entire test suite by typing out 6 characters and waiting a few seconds. That's powerful, and it's going to allow us to create better software over time. So I am really excited to dive into testing because it is such an important feature. In the next lesson, we're going to create some test cases for a few example functions. I'm excited to get to that, so let's jump right in.